This is East Asia Tonight.
Good evening, I'm Ateli Edwards. Tonight's top stories from East Asia. China urges Israel and Iran to dial down tensions and return to dialogue, warning that the region risks spiraling as fresh missile strikes hit both sides. President Xi Jinping touches down in Kazakhstan for the China Central Asia Summit. He will hold bilateral meetings first, aimed at expanding the Belt and Road Initiative. And China's military stages joint sea and air patrols in the South China Sea, accusing the Philippines of heightening tensions by bringing in outside powers for joint missions. And British intelligence say that more than 6,000 North Korean soldiers deployed to fight for Russia in Ukraine's Kursk region have been killed or injured. Also in East Asia tonight, quiet returns to the Korean border. Could the current stop in loudspeaker broadcasts be the start of something new between North and South Korea? We ask an expert. Music lessons and acupuncture, along with a relaxing view of greenery. Well, CNA's Lauren Ong takes a look at China's first Alzheimer's care village. China is urging Israel and Iran to reduce tensions immediately after both sides launched a new wave of missile attacks as the conflict enters its fourth day. Now, the Chinese Foreign Ministry asking all parties to cool down, stop the region from falling into greater turmoil, and return to dialogue and negotiation. The latest Iranian attacks struck a synagogue and a school in Nibrak, a city east of Tel Aviv. Also hit was an Israeli oil refinery, damaging part of the power grid. Now, casualties are mounting on both sides. Israel says at least 24 people have been killed in the country since it launched preemptive attacks on Iran on Friday. While the toll is much higher in Iran, with 224 people killed so far. Iran is calling on Britain, France and Germany to pressure Israel to stop its attacks. Its foreign ministry also saying that the Iranian parliament is preparing a bill to leave the nuclear non-proliferation treaty, even though it's opposed to developing weapons of mass destruction. Well, joining us now is Trent Murray in Tel Aviv. Trent, Israel's military says that it destroyed a substantial missile capability in Iran and that it intends to push further east. What can you tell us about its near-term strategy?
Well, we know the IDF is now flying many hours of the day in the airspace above Iran. It appears their current strategy is to try and destroy radar stations and air defence systems in order to try and maintain air superiority across the country. They are saying that they have now cleared a pathway from here in Israel all the way to Tehran in around the centre of the country, but it does appear they are pushing further east. Just before coming on air, we're hearing reports from Iranian state media that there's been strikes at Mashhad airport. Now, that is quite far in the east of Iran. It's about 2,300 kilometres from here, and that would represent one of the deepest strikes we have seen. It appears what they are trying to do here is now extend their area of aerial control using their Air Force jets. They're also looking for rocket launchers and those ballistic missile sites that are being used, of course, to deploy those barrages of missiles that we've seen arriving here in Israel. So certainly right now, from where we are standing, it appears that the military operation by the IDF is picking up steam, gaining memento. There is no signs that they're looking to back off right now or even entertain the idea of some sort of ceasefire.
But, international pressure, though, is mounting for a halt or cooling down, in this conflict. Are you saying that no sign of that happening anytime soon?
Well, look, diplomatic interventions and messages are certainly being sent. We understand that China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi has spoken with his counterparts in both Iran and here in Israel. We do have readouts from Beijing. With the Foreign Minister of Iran, China has said it explicitly condemns Israel's violation of Iran's sovereignty, security and territorial integrity, and it supports Iran in safeguarding its national sovereignty. Now, in terms of the messaging to Israel, well, we are being told that the message the Foreign Minister conveyed was that it urged both Israel and Iran to resolve its differences through dialogue, and added that China is willing to play a constructive role in supporting these efforts. That's according to the official statement from Beijing. Now, of course, it's not just from China and across parts of Asia that we are seeing those diplomatic messages. Of course, Tokyo has also condemned what we are seeing. But I think the big one we have to look at is the G7, of course, getting underway in Canada later today. We are hearing the Canadians shopping around the idea of those 7 countries potentially putting out a statement calling for tensions to be eased. But we're also seeing military action from one of Israel's key allies, the United States. We are hearing, according to maritime traffic monitoring, that the US is moving one of its carrier strike force groups, the USS Nimitz, from the South China Sea here to the Middle East. We are being told that that carrier strike group was due in Vietnam's Da Nang City on Friday for a major reception with the Vietnamese military. The US Embassy is reportedly saying that has now been called off as the US moves military assets, as I say, from the South China Sea here to the Middle East, given the tensions.
Trent Murray in Tel Aviv, thanks for that report. The Israel-Iran conflict casting a shadow over a meeting of a group of 7 leaders in Canada, as mentioned. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen says that a negotiated solution over the conflict in the long term is the best option. She was speaking after her arrival at the summit. Well, the EU leader also says she told Israel's leader Benjamin Netanyahu that in this context, Israel had the right to defend itself, and Iran is a principal source of regional instability. Nick Harper has more from Banff.
The G7 leaders spent Sunday arriving here in Canada, arriving in Calgary and then jumping on helicopters to come into the Rocky Mountains ahead of the G7 summit. They arrived individually. There wasn't an opportunity for them to gather. That instead will take place on Monday. And that may be one of the rare moments of unity that we see taking place during the course of this summit. There is very little expectation of common ground being found during the 2-day meeting. The main problem being that Donald Trump has rubbed many of the G7 other members up the wrong way during the last 4.5 months since he returned to the White House. Central to that are the trade tariffs that he's put in place against the other G7 nations. The expectation is that there will be plenty of sideline conversations between the US president and the other leaders to try and negotiate some sort of trade deal that could remove tariffs against their individual nations. But undoubtedly, global security has been catapulted to the top of the priority list when it comes to the major issues they plan to discuss. Ukraine has dropped to second place. Instead, it's now Iran and Israel that the leaders will be focusing on.
Obviously, the conflict with Israel and Iran is centrepiece, and this provides the opportunity to talk to our co-leaders about the fast-moving situation and to make our strong case together that there must be de-escalation of this conflict in the interests of the region and of course the world.
During the course of the last few days, we have seen the situation there spiralling somewhat out of control. The big concern is that things could deteriorate further. The US president has said he hopes that peace can be brokered, and we are expecting the G7 leaders to put out a joint statement calling for de-escalation. But there will be no joint communique at the end of the summit, as would normally take place. The leaders are trying to avoid the embarrassment that took place the last time that Canada hosted back in 2018, when Donald Trump left early and refused to take part in that closing statement. Instead, Canada will put out a summary of what was discussed. The hope is that the major economies will be able to find some common ground, even if they don't see fully eye to eye on all of the issues that they will be discussing. Nick Harper, CNA, Banff.
Well, on the summit sidelines, Japanese Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba is expected to speak with U.S. President Donald Trump in a bid to get the American leader to remove a 25% tariff on Japanese cars and a 24% across-the-board reciprocal tariff. Mr. Ishiba's government is under pressure to reach a deal that is crucial to sustaining Japan's economic growth. Now, South Korean President Lee Jae-myung, meantime, is attending the G7 summit as a guest. He is expected to signal to world leaders that his country's top-level diplomacy is back on track. That's after a disastrous martial law attempt by ousted leader Yoon Suk-yeol late last year. Chinese President Xi Jinping has arrived in Kazakhstan for talks with Central Asian leaders. It's seen as a signal of Beijing's growing influence in a region caught between competing powers from Washington to Moscow. Well, the Chinese president paid a state visit to Kazakhstan just last year and is here again for the second China-Central Asia summit held in the capital, Astana. This is Mr. Xi's third overseas trip this year, after Southeast Asia and Russia. He will meet Kazakh President Kassym-Jomart Tokayev, and the leaders of Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan will also be attending the summit. Central Asia is an important target for China's Belt and Road Initiative. And for more, we are joined by CNA's Tan Yu-guan in Shanghai. Yu-guan, so the Chinese and the Kazakh leaders, they will be holding talks in Astana. Do we know what's on the agenda?
Well, we know they have a lot to catch up on. After all, in their previous round of talks, the two countries signed more than 30 agreements covering trade, transport, energy, industry, agriculture, education, as well as technical and economic cooperation. With so many agreements in place, there are bound to be issues to be resolved to push these through from agreement to execution. To China, Kazakhstan is strategically vital to its regional security and energy routes. It is a key oil and natural gas supplier to China, after all. It leads the region, the Central Asian region, in terms of oil production. What's more, it's also a vital overland route, a gateway for China-Europe freight. Kazakhstan is the core country in China's Belt and Road Initiative. China has since 2023 shown growing interest in the so-called Middle Corridor trade route, connecting China with Europe via Kazakhstan, the Caspian Sea, Azerbaijan, Georgia, and Turkey. Most importantly, bypassing Russia, but also bypassing the usual Eastern Sea route that can be easily blockaded by the US or its allies. Kazakhstan's influence around Xinjiang also makes it a critical partner for China's counter-terrorism efforts around the region. So it's no wonder that ties with Kazakhstan has been elevated to a permanent, comprehensive strategic partnership in 2022. That's the highest level designation that China has ever given to any bilateral relationship. You might recall Xi Jinping chose Kazakhstan for his first overseas trip after the pandemic in 2022, returned in 2024, and now again he's back in Kazakhstan in 2025. Otelli?
So, with Mr. Xi attending this second China-Central Asia summit in Astana tomorrow, walk us through again the significance of this summit.
Well, this is the first time the China-Central Asia summit will be held in a Central Asian country. The first summit was held in Xi'an, China. Central Asia is strategically important for China. The region is resource-rich. It is an alternative corridor for China to the outside world, should its eastern seaboard, now dominated by US allies, be blockaded for whatever reason. So watchers expect interconnectivity to be the focus of this summit, including the China-Kazakhstan-Uzbekistan railway. That railway is due to start construction next month and is due for completion in about 5 years. That line will link China's Xinjiang region to both countries and reduce the dependence of all three countries on Russia's transport network. It can also be eventually extended to the Middle East, South Asia, and Europe. So when completed, this link will certainly boost trade with the region even more. After all, China's trade with the region has grown by more than 7% annually, outpacing China's overall foreign trade by 2 percentage points. Now, in a decade, trade with the region has also more than doubled in value. And it's accelerating. In the first 5 months of this year, China's total trade with the 5 Central Asian countries grew by more than 10% year-on-year, setting a new record. Now, after all, the region supplies China with oil and gas, metal and minerals, including rare earths, which is now a key strategic resource in our high-tech world, as we saw recently how processed rare earths was used by China as a bargaining chip in its trade war with the US. Now, agricultural products is another strong sector that has seen strong growth. Oteli?
Well, thanks so very much for that report. CNA's Tan Yuguan live from Shanghai. Well, we're going to go for a short break now, but coming up next on East Asia Tonight, Roland Lim will bring us all the action from the Energy Asia Forum in Kuala Lumpur.
This hour, the CEO of Malaysian state-owned energy firm Petronas and the CEO of Saudi giant Aramco, plus the head of the oil exporters bloc OPEC, all weighing in on the factors influencing oil markets and the need for balance in the global energy transition.
Plus, mixed signals on the Chinese economy. Domestic consumption jumping, but factory activity seeing a slowdown. Hello again, you are watching East Asia Tonight, and it is now time for business news with Henry Yin. So Henry, you've got some China data to share with us?
Yes, we got a lot to unpack, and we start from the China data you've mentioned. A temporary trade truce with the US has offered China's economy some reprieve, with domestic consumption surprisingly jumping last month. Retail sales for May increased 6.4%, the fastest pace in more than a year, and beats all estimates. That helped offset a slowdown in factory activity. Industrial output climbed 5.8%, missing estimates. The stronger consumption could give Beijing a confidence boost as it continues to navigate its trade relationship with the US. Both sides reached a tariff truce mid-May, which paused US tariff threats of as much as 145%. The government has set a growth target of around 5% this year and has made boosting consumption a priority. While the economy's relative strength so far this year could buy authorities more time before unleashing additional economic support. The economic figures lift market sentiment in Greater China as major indices closed in positive territory. Property and tech shares among top contributors to the gain. Well, this comes despite China's home prices falling faster in May, prompting officials to renew their pledge to revive demand. While some calm in East Asia markets, even as tensions rise in the Middle East, we are seeing Nikkei 225 up by more than 1.2% at the close of the trade, as a weaker yen continues to boost exporters. Kospi spiked, driven by bargain hunting and gains in defense, energy and IT sectors, while TAIEX closed in the red. Well, the Energy Asia Forum opened in Malaysia today, bringing together policymakers and industry leaders from across the region to tackle the challenges of decarbonization, energy security, and sustainable growth. CNA's Roland Lim reports from Kuala Lumpur.
The impact of a conflict half a world away, that's become a key talking point here in Energy Asia 2025 in Malaysia's capital. The fighting between Israel and Iran have sent oil prices soaring on concerns that supplies could be choked off. Plus, there are worries about the safety, security, and even availability of transport oil via a major artery, that's the Strait of Hormuz, which Iran has threatened to close. Now, the CEO of Malaysia's state-run energy giant Petronas spoke of a poly-crisis, that's volatility triggered by new and protracted geopolitical conflicts, friction over trade and tariffs, along with an energy transition that is still taking shape.
Sadly, in the past few days, the escalation of the conflict around the Strait of Hormuz, where around 20% of the total global supply flows through every day, we've seen price surging in anticipation of a supply shock. Some may hail this. It's an intense price rally, one of the most intense since the 2022 energy crisis. But we must remember this is unfolding at a time when the world is still reeling from the spectre of reciprocal tariffs. Though we cannot yet precisely measure the true impact of all these events, the global energy system, which is already strained from the natural progression of our civilization, is indeed at great risk.
Other energy CEOs are also talking about risk. The chief of Saudi giant Aramco didn't fly out for this event because of the Middle East conflict. Instead, Amin Nasser delivered a video message saying that we are witnessing threats to energy security in real time and arguing it highlights the need for a balanced approach to the global energy transition. Now, he agrees renewables are important, but he says that the world must be pragmatic and cannot abandon traditional forms of energy. New energy sources don't replace the old, he says. They add to the mix. And many parts of the world, especially Asia, are energy hungry. The Secretary General of OPEC, the bloc representing oil producers, spoke here at Energy Asia. Haitham Al-Ghais says that oil still represents 30% of the global energy mix, and that record demand year after year means a demand peak is still a long way off. The wider OPEC Plus group decided to ramp up its output before the Israel-Iran conflict broke. The message from Mr. Al-Ghais is that balance is key.
Even oil has been, its demise has been written many times before. The theory of peak oil demand has proven wrong and wrong again and again. Internal combustion engine. I mean, talking about Asia, since we're here, maybe I should focus a little bit on Asia. In our forecast, we see that Asia will add another over 800 million vehicles to the car fleet by the year 2050. And before somebody says, yes, but that's all going to be EVs, no, it's not all going to be EVs. Yeah. A big portion will be EVs, almost a third of that, but then you add in hybrids, and still the internal combustion engine will still play a role.
Energy executives we heard from here agree the energy transition isn't like flipping a switch. A long-time oil watcher, Daniel Yergin from S&P Global, says that peak demand will be more like a plateau, and it will happen at different times.
It's a troubled energy transition. The notions that are out there that how easy it would be to just sweep into 2050 and net zero, we're seeing that it is just more challenging, more difficult, and that there's not going to be a single energy transition. It's going to be multidimensional in different regions, different paces, with different mixes of technology and different priorities. And we've heard here in Southeast Asia, there's the priority of economic growth, poverty reduction, which is very different than the view in Northwest Europe. And one of the strong things I've heard at this conference, and I hear again and again, is that another part of the world should not be dictating its view of an energy transition on an area in which economic growth continues to be very important.
So while many people want the energy transition to go faster, people also want to travel, heat and to cool their homes and to power their devices, all of that. What we've seen at these energy forums more and more is that along with being a chance to discuss the impact of geopolitical events or other matters, they are about advocating for an equitable and sustainable energy transition, but also a practical one too. Roland Lim, CNA, Kuala Lumpur.
Nippon Steel shares are up after U.S. President Donald Trump approved its $14.9 billion bid for U.S. Steel. Shares rose as much as 5% early today before paring gains. And the deal marks Nippon Steel's biggest ever overseas bet. It includes $11 billion in new investments by 2028 and significant concessions to the U.S. government, which will hold a so-called golden share that gives Washington a say in major decisions. Nippon Steel's annual production capacity is set to rise to 86 million metric tons from 63 million tons. The acquisition will help it diversify away from shrinking demand at home and to help it cope with competition from low-cost Chinese exports. Still, some investors remain concerned about the near-term financial strain from the sizable investments and how much control the U.S. government will have over the company thanks to its golden share. And that's all for business. Otelli, back to you.
Thanks so very much for that, Henry. Well, we are going to go for another break now, but coming up on East Asia tonight, North and South Korea switching off massive loudspeakers aimed at each other at the fortified border. Could that be a sign of a thaw in years-long frosty ties? We'll find out when we speak with an expert after the break. This is East Asia Tonight, and here are the headlines we're following. China is calling on Israel and Iran to cool down as it warns the region is at risk of spiraling out of control as fresh missile strikes hit both sides. President Xi Jinping is in Kazakhstan, his second visit to the country in 2 years. This time it's for the China Central Asia Summit. And the Chinese military conducts joint sea and air patrols in the South China Sea, just as the Philippines holds a joint drill with Japan in disputed waters. Signs of a positive turn in relations between North and South Korea after newly elected South Korean President Lee Jae-myung ordered loudspeaker broadcasts aimed at the North to be turned off along the border. North Korea did the same 1 day later. Inter-Korean ties have been marked by escalating tensions and limited engagement in recent years. A former conservative South Korean leader, Yoon Suk-yeol, in his 3 years as president, had ramped up military cooperation and joint exercises with the U.S. and Japan, calling it necessary in response to threats from Pyongyang. North Korea, on its part, has stepped up missile tests, built up its weapons programs, and boosted relations with Russia. For more on what the stop in propaganda broadcasts could mean, we have Meredith Shaw, independent scholar specializing in North and South Korean affairs. But just before we dive into the shifting dynamics between the two Koreas under South Korea's new government, to start with, Meredith, I just thought I'd get your thoughts on the current Israel-Iran conflict, and how do you think Tel Aviv's preemptive strike on Iran might influence the mindset of countries like North Korea, where nuclear weapons, it's considered vital to national security?
Yeah, it really reinforces everything that the Kim regime has repeatedly said about why it needs those weapons and why it needs to test those weapons, prove that they work, and why it shouldn't ever agree to let them go completely. So their propaganda still talks about the fall of the Gaddafi regime in Libya and blames that basically on the fact that Gaddafi gave up his nuclear weapons. So they've pointed to a direct link there, and probably they will point to a similar link here. North Korea can point to the fact that Iran does not have a working bomb, or at least it's not tested one, and say, well, this would not have happened if it were nuclear armed.
So how concerned should we be then that, Israel's preemptive strike is setting this worrying precedent, right? One that countries in a region like North Korea or China, they might use to justify similar actions in future disputes?
Well, North Korea might make the argument that because Israel has done this preemptive strike, that if South Korea were to begin a nuclear program on its soil, which some South Korean politicians have threatened to do, that they would be justified in attacking that. I do not think that they would ever act on that unless they were truly suicidal, but they probably would throw around that sort of rhetoric, and that argument might have a deterrent effect on many South Koreans. North Korea has also used Israel in the past as an example of countries that are tacitly accepted as nuclear-armed states and said that the same standard should apply to itself. So you can see how they would draw the same conclusion here. But
right,
I don't think they would ever act on it.
Sure. Well, that's a positive thing, just keeping it to the rhetoric of things. Let's turn to inter-Korean relations now. We've got President Lee Jae-myung. He first started switching off the loudspeakers, and Pyongyang following suit. This, you think, signals an early shift in tone between the two Koreas?
Well, the loudspeakers only restarted about a year ago, and that was in retaliation against South Korea switching on its loudspeakers, which was in retaliation against North Korea sending those balloons full of trash. So since South Korea stopped its own loudspeakers last week, it makes sense that North Korea would do the same. They don't really accomplish anything and are generally only a nuisance reaction to whatever the South is doing. So you could say it's not a bad sign, but it's not really a significant one yet. A bigger signal would be if North Korea started talking about reopening the military lines of communication, which have been frozen for over 2 years now, I don't think they've done that yet. And another important thing to watch for here is basically the South Korean government has the right to do whatever it wants with its loudspeakers. But what will be concerning is if new President Lee Jae-myung also moves to restrict the private activist groups in South Korea from sending leaflet balloons to the north, as his predecessor Moon Jae-in did. And that sort of thing opens up a lot of legal constitutional issues with free speech, and it also signals how far a progressive president is willing to go to mollify Pyongyang. So just something to watch for going forward.
So, Meredith, what then is it going to take for North Korea to open up those lines of communication then?
Well, it's all up to Kim Jong-un, basically. It's up to his feelings. Who knows what he is thinking about the current situation. He's probably pleased that there's a more friendly regime coming in South Korea, but with his very profitable current relationship with Russia, and is kind of enjoying being a rogue state leader for the moment, the urgency is off on trying to pursue outreach with South Korea. And given that the last round of talks ended very badly from North Korea's point of view, it would take significant, they would have to have something significant on the table in order to agree to return to talks of that sort in the future.
I was going to ask you to elaborate more on that, because you're talking about Pyongyang's, we're seeing their growing military alignment with Russia, including reports of the troop deployments to Ukraine. How does that essentially complicate the reconciliation efforts with Seoul?
Well, having a relationship with Russia, a sort of lips and teeth relationship with Russia right now, this gives North Korea a lot of wiggle room, at least in the short term, while this war is going on. And Russia is bringing in North Korean manpower and giving them a lot of useful technology and support in return. It means they don't really have to worry about sanctions as much. They don't have to try to make nice with South Korea or the US in order to get rid of those sanctions. And it also gives them more leverage with China, which up to recently was their desperately needed ally. So it seems like they're getting a lot more comfortable with their position. They're also putting a lot of emphasis on this new friendship treaty that they have with Russia, and suggesting in their propaganda that they see it as a sort of NATO-style mutual defense treaty. It's unlikely that Russia feels the same way, but there's a chance that North Korea may believe this and feel assured that it now has a sort of security guarantee. It has, in its back pocket. It might feel more protected from outside pressure and threats. So it makes their strategic calculus a little more comfortable.
And also with Trump, Trump is very busy right now, having to deal with a lot of things at home and overseas and tariffs and all of that. But how do you see his administration playing a role in terms of trying to re-engage North Korea again diplomatically?
Well, Pyongyang has said that it is not interested in any more dialogue with Trump. They continue to say that since the beginning of this year, and they've reportedly already rejected some overtures from the White House already, allegedly. Of course, nothing is certain with North Korea, and they might reverse that position if they see some profit to it in the future, but not without some difficulty and without losing some face, since they've very publicly broken with Donald Trump. One small sign that they might be leaving the door open to just a crack is that we have not seen a return of the really vicious ad hominem attacks on the president personally, calling him a dotard and such. Their rhetoric recently, of course, condemns the United States government broadly, but they aren't really bringing up President Trump personally in the kind of lampooning style that they've done in the past. I think they're still trying to decide exactly what to do with Trump and how to tell the story of those summits in a way that makes them look good, look like it was all according to plan and a good idea to proceed with them. So I think they're holding off and possibly waiting to see if this new president could work in their favor again.
Well, I almost forgotten about that dotard comment, but thanks for that gentle reminder there. Meredith Shaw, independent scholar specializing in East Asian politics. Thanks for that. Now, British intelligence, meantime, are saying that more than 6,000 North Korean soldiers are believed to have been killed or injured while fighting for Russia in its Kursk area against Ukrainian troops. Now, this number is more than half of the 11,000 North Koreans initially sent to fight in the region. The British Defence Ministry says the high casualty numbers are most likely due to what it calls a highly attritional dismounted assault. What does that mean? Well, a dismounted assault refers to an attack that's carried out by soldiers on foot after they leave armored vehicles. North Korea in April admitted for the first time it had deployed its troops to Russia in support of Moscow. Pyongyang, however, did not disclose the number it sent, nor the casualties. Russia and North Korea last year signed a landmark mutual defense treaty and committed to boosting their military ties. China's military ran joint sea and air patrols in the South China Sea on Saturday, just as the Philippines and Japan held joint drills in the disputed waters. China's military said in a statement on WeChat that the Philippines' act of rallying countries outside the region in joint patrols has escalated security risks in the South China Sea and undermined regional peace and stability. China and the Philippines have repeatedly clashed in the resource-rich waterway since 2023. China claims almost the entire South China Sea, putting it at odds with Brunei, Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines, and Vietnam. The Permanent Court of Arbitration in The Hague in 2016 ruled that China's claims were not supported by international law, a decision that Beijing rejects. A U.S. aircraft carrier, USS Nimitz, has left the South China Sea and is heading west in the direction of the Middle East as tensions in the region soar. Reuters was reporting data from ship tracking website Marine Traffic and quoted sources as saying that a reception for a planned port call in Vietnam was cancelled. The Nimitz carrier strike group conducted maritime security operations in the South China Sea last week. Time now for another short break, but coming up next on East Asia Tonight. See what China's first ever Alzheimer's village is offering patients under its care. And Shanghai gets a new theme park. Details when we return. Thai Prime Minister Paetongtarn Shinawatra says that Thailand has not shut the border with Cambodia after the neighbour threatened countermeasures if Thailand kept the border closed. Well, Ms. Paetongtarn says that Thailand has only adjusted the timings the border checkpoint stays in operation, following reports from Cambodia that its troops have yet to withdraw from the disputed area. Cambodian Senate President Hun Sen had warned that Cambodia will close all border crossings from tomorrow and stop imports from Thailand if a full border closure is imposed. Now, relations between the two countries have been tense following a brief military clash last month in the disputed Emerald Triangle. Well, that's where the borders of Cambodia, Thailand and Laos meet. Militaries of both sides agreed to withdraw from the area after the incident. Officials met in Phnom Penh over the weekend to discuss how to reduce tensions. Meanwhile, Cambodia has asked the International Court of Justice to resolve the ongoing border dispute, but Bangkok has previously said it does not recognize the World Court's jurisdiction, emphasizing its preference for a bilateral resolution. Indian officials have recovered the second black box of the Air India plane that crashed on Thursday. The cockpit voice recorder is expected to provide crucial clues as investigators work to determine what caused the incident. Now, observers say analyzing the data from these devices could take up to 5 days. The first black box was recovered on Friday, a day after the crash. There were 242 people on board the Air India flight, which was en route to London. All but one lost their lives. At least 38 others were killed on the ground after the Boeing 7878 hit a medical college campus, taking the total death toll to 279. Now, this is the first ever crash involving a Boeing Dreamliner. Multiple agencies are now probing the incident, including India's Aircraft Accident Investigation Bureau and the U.S. National Transportation Safety Board. Officials from UK's Civil Aviation Authority and the U.S. Federal Aviation Administration are also assisting in the probe. Separately, an Air India Dreamliner heading to Delhi has returned to Hong Kong after a technical issue mid-air. The Boeing 7878 Dreamliner flew back to Hong Kong as a precautionary measure, according to local reports. According to tracking data, the plane landed just over an hour after it took off from Hong Kong. The incident comes just days after an Air India flight to London using the same Boeing aircraft crashed in Ahmedabad, killing all but one of the 242 people on board. A storm Wu-Tip's wind intensity is weakening, but its effects will still be felt in southern China as its remnants move northeast, bringing heavy rain to parts of Jiangxi, Fujian and Zhejiang provinces. The Chinese authorities on Sunday lifted its blue warning. That's the lowest of its 4-tiered alert. Train and ferry services gradually resumed services over the weekend. The storm, the first to make landfall in China this year, had prompted the evacuation of tens of thousands of people. At least 2 others were killed in Guangxi when a tree collapsed onto a residence. Now, in central Vietnam, 5 people have died and 2 are missing after torrential rains. 3 victims were in Quang Tri province and 2 from neighboring Quang Binh. Vietnam's agriculture ministry says more than 70,000 hectares of farmland were flooded. Scientists say the severity of such natural disasters is on the rise as global warming brings about more intense storms. China has the world's largest number of Alzheimer's patients, and with the population aging fast, authorities are getting serious about ramping up dedicated care services by 2030. For the private sector, this has meant investing in new ideas as well, like China's first ever Alzheimer's care village. Lauren Ong has a story.
76-year-old Wang Laifei is out and about, taking music lessons, going for acupuncture, and a quick stroll at the park. Seemingly regular activities, but for her loved ones, unthinkable about 6 months ago. Madam Wang suffers from moderate Alzheimer's, and for the last 2 years, that's meant spending most of her time at home as her children worried about her safety.
之前家里面其实是有保姆的。 但是保姆没有办法一直看他，就是我们再也看不住他，他都走失过2回。
Looking for alternatives, Miss Liu and her husband decided to try a new Alzheimer's care village they heard open last year.
我觉得他这儿吃得好，睡得好，精神状态也好，就是完全是另外一个比较精神的老太太，我觉得挺好的。
Located in northwestern Shanxi's provincial capital, Xi'an, where the family lives, is the first dedicated facility for Alzheimer's patients in China. Spanning 43,000 square meters or 6 football fields, the village sits amid greenery, lakes, and the backdrop of the famous Tingling Mountains. The project is developed by Singapore real estate and healthcare firm Perennial Holdings. Now, a key idea about dementia villages is to blur the lines between home and care. Here I'm standing at what resembles a bus stop, allowing residents to experience the familiar routine of going somewhere, just as they would in their everyday lives. From an activity center to a post office, hair salon, and shops. Here at this supermarket-like space, residents can shop around with the village's very own play money. It's to give them a sense of independence and self-care. Residents are free to move about the village, but are monitored through cameras and facial recognition technology. Staff also role-play as post office workers or neighbors, blending familiarity with support. China has the greatest number of Alzheimer's patients in the world, with nearly 17 million people affected by the condition, along with other types of dementia. And as China's population ages rapidly, over 15 million of those who suffer from dementia are aged 60 and above. Earlier this year, China revealed a national action plan to tackle this. By 2030, half of all elder care facilities in China with more than 100 beds are expected to have dedicated dementia care units. Authorities also hope to train 15 million caregivers. For Perennial, this has already meant incentives from local governments.
目前是有2种方式，新建的话是1万块钱一张床，改建的机构呢是5000块钱一张床。运营补贴呢，它有一定的条件，经营一定的时间，入住率达到一定的标准。
The Alzheimer's village in Xi'an is only the 6th in the world, with the first set up in the Netherlands about 20 years ago. Although experts say its efficacy has yet to be proven, it's still a step in the right direction.
In an institutional and a more healthcare or medical care facility, we end up restricting their freedom, and therefore it can lead to agitation, restlessness, poor cooperation, and therefore a very poor quality of life. We want to then create spaces that would accommodate their routines and habits.
Fees at Perennial's village range from about $1,200 to $1,800 depending on room type and level of care required, higher than the $1,000 Ms. Liu would have otherwise paid for a nanny. The village offers 700 beds across its elder care complex, as well as its nursing and rehabilitation hospitals. It currently has 26 residents, who are among 50 who have lived there since the village opened in March last year. Perennial says it hopes to attract more to the village and have about 100 residents by year end.
我们的爬坡和运营的周期会稍微长一点，有一个市场的一个培育嘛，还有我们要找准我们的精准客户。
In the meantime, Perennial is renting out 55 rooms to tourists and visitors at $60 a night, which it says allows positive interaction with its patients. Lauren Ong, CNA, Xi'an.
China's first Legoland is set for a grand opening next month when it started what organizers call trial operations. Now, the theme park and hotel sits on more than 300,000 square meters in Shanghai's Jinshan district. It will be the world's largest Legoland, designed for children from 2 to 12 years old and their families. The mega resort has thousands of models made with more than 85 million Lego bricks and a special monkey kid zone inspired by the Chinese classic novel Journey to the West. 2 other Legoland parks are being built in China, in Shenzhen and Chengdu.
觉得还是挺震撼的，因为本身看到的是一些很小的乐高的一些积木啊，然后现在看到变成实景，然后就是总体还是觉得很棒的，
感觉很开心，玩得非常的满意，因为其他区域没有这么大积木，可以自由发挥的。
And that wraps up East Asia Tonight this Monday. Don't forget your headlines anytime at CNA.Asia and find us on Facebook and YouTube. Thanks for watching.